Hi everyone. This is Gregory Muna, aka Master Moo, your friend. We say it with a smile, but I am your friend. I try. At least I try to be friendly. Okay. And so welcoming you to another episode of our weekly podcast. Art is the church of God the Creator. And we say that with a smile, but we say it because we mean it. And so this is an online gathering place for those of us who do believe that, in some level, and however we may understand that art is the church of God the Creator, that art is not just fun, entertainment, a disposable consumer item on the shelf, but we view it as an essential, necessary activity of being a human being. And it's not snobism, it's not elitism. Art is for everyone, for the poorest, for the richest, for the middle, for everyone on planet Earth, because it is how we relate to our sense perceptions. Art is how we relate to our five senses. So in theological language, we say it again, that art is the revelation of God through the senses. And that, visual art is the revelation of God through vision, through sight. Sound art, including music, is the revelation of God through our sonic perception. And that goes down the line to tactile perceptions, and olfactory perceptions and gustatory perceptions. And then it may or may not be intermediated by a symbolic medium such as language, But even when it is intermediated by a symbolic medium such as language, it's always referring to the perceptual medium of sound. In other words, we read words on a page in literature, but we mentally form the sounds, and that's how we can understand poetry. But of course, poetry does not live on the page. It is represented on the page. Poetry lives in the voice and in the body containing the voice. You can only understand a poem when you read it out loud and you carefully note how you feel, the sensations in your body, in your physical being, when you read it out loud. The actual physical sensations of making the vowels and the consonants with the muscles of your mouth and your head, with your breath, with your lungs, with your diaphragm, and all of the subtle vibrations inside of your body that you feel. That is poetry. That's the meaning of poetry. Poetry is how you feel in your body when you read a poem. Poetry is embodied. And that is also true of fiction and drama. That is also true. The Poetics are the same. And we're using as our touchstone Aristotle's Poetics, which is sort of a continuing seminar in Aristotle's Poetics. But today we want to focus specifically, our topic for today is how to analyze and interpret and evaluate dramas using the criteria of Aristotle's Poetics. So let's have just a quick recap. In Aristotle's Poetics, he talks about the poetic principles of the classical Greek world, and he uses as his touchstone the epic poetry of Homer, and versus the verse tragedy, which was the newer form, which was just sort of coming in the 5th century BC, related to his fundamental principle of imitation, as opposed to Plato's fundamental principle of unity, of oneness, although Aristotle does talk about unity after he talks about the diversity of the elements. But we'll start with the diversity element of the elements. And so he, again, Aristotle contrasts epic poetry from drama, and then drama he looks at the basic subdivisions of comedy versus tragedy, and where we ended at the end of section 5, he said here, And again, this is a recap. Tragedy endeavors as far as possible to confine itself to a single revolution of the sun, or but slightly exceeded this limit, whereas epic action has no limits of time. This then is the second point of difference, although the first, same freedom was admitted in tragedy as in epic poetry, and imitation of characters of a higher type and lower type, tragedy, lower type characters, comedy. Of their constituent parts, some are common to both, some peculiar to tragedy. Whoever therefore knows that what is good or bad tragedy also knows about epic poetry. And the key summary point of his previous lecture 5 was all the elements of an epic poem are found in tragedy, but the elements of a tragedy are not all found in the epic poem. So this is, I think, a very bold claim, actually, that Aristotle is putting forth, because tragedy in the mature sense, Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, was still in development in his lifetime, was still, sort of reaching its you might say, its climax, its Euripidean climax. Some people consider Aeschylus to be the greatest. Some people consider Sophocles to be the greatest. Others, Euripides. They all have their unique greatnesses, so there's no point in pitting one against the other. They're all three are phenomenal and great. And we'll come back to looking at this in a few weeks. In about a month from now, we'll look specifically at the Trojan women. Can't wait. But right now, we're just looking at the ground in general of the elements of tragedy. Again, which Aristotle says, all the elements of an epic poem are found in tragedy, but the elements of a tragedy are not all found in the epic poem. Interesting implication there. So let's move on. And again, I'll only break into commentary when there's some sort of culturally specific point. And otherwise, we'll try to stick with lecture. So we're up to lecture 6. And again, keep in mind that the Poetics are just simply Aristotle's lecture notes for his school for the Lyceum. These were not polished public oratory. I mean, these were just very sort of simple notes that he provided for his adult students, who were mostly, returning soldiers. I mean, adult education would have commenced after the completion of one's military service in Athens, and this was in Athens. The Lyceum and the Plato's Academy were both in Athens, in the suburbs there. And it was standard that you had your mandatory military service from age 20 to age 30. And the new concept started by his teacher Plato was that education might continue even into adulthood, even post-military, even after you were married and had kids and starting a business. And this was a radically new concept in the classical world. I mean, in earlier generations, your education was complete, certainly by the time you entered the military. And sidebar, we need to revive the classical concept of elementary education, which was primarily physical education, with the academic drilling going on during downtimes. I mean, basically from early childhood, from like pre-K through high school ages, you went to the gym. It was a gymnasium, I mean, it was the naked exercise place. And we don't need to bring back the nakedness, but the exercise, the physical activity, the idea that children have an abundance of physical energy which needs to be harnessed towards fitness is extremely important. I mean, the fitness level, as we know in the classical world, was much greater than our sedentary fitness level now. And that was established in childhood with the discipline which I didn't have in my childhood. I was a bookworm. I mean, and I try now in my fumbling ways to maintain basic levels of fitness, but my personal physical fitness level will never approach that of people like Sophocles and Aeschylus, who lived into perfectly great physical vitality up until age 90. Even Socrates, who had many physical ailments, who was epileptic and had all sorts of physical problems, was still running marathons and in tremendous physical shape up till the 70s, and was still, had a very active physical marriage, with his wife, with Xanthippe, because they had young kids at the time of his death, So, all right. So end of sidebar. We need to, if we had patronage, if we had enlightened patronage, we would establish a school of a gymnasium, a physical culture education, which the primary focus of elementary education is physical training, and then with an eye towards public service. The idea that when your physical training is complete, then you enter into a period of mandatory volunteer work for the public good, which in that time was military, but could be a revived concept of the Peace Corps, or even in religious communities, there's the idea of early adulthood mission, as in the Church of the Latter-day Saints and so on, which is a very, very noble thing. And so we need to have fitness, public service, and then interspersed with that, when you're not, when you're recuperating from running and wrestling and and all of those sorts of javelin and all of those skills that you're developing, that's when you learn multiplication tables, that's when you learn spelling, grammar, format, all that sort of stuff. My opinion. And that and $3 will get you on the subway. Okay. But so we're setting that aside because we're looking at Aristotle's Poetics, which is a adult education. It assumes a certain higher level, but stick with it. Okay, we're up to his lecture number 6, where Aristotle says, of the poetry which imitates in hexameter verse, and of comedy we will speak hereafter. Okay, now hexameter verse, 6 beats, was the standard verse form. Trochaic hexameter and dactylic hexameters, these were the standard lines in Greek. And we said that classical Greek, different from modern Greek and very different from modern European languages, as far as we know, was a tonal language in which there were specifically pitches, and it's, I believe, to be usually in the range of a perfect fifth, because that was considered to be a perfect interval, a Pythagorean interval. But if anyone spoke that way today, I mean, I guess you would call the cops. Da, 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 da. I mean, if someone kept a constant perfect fifth between their stressed and their unstressed syllables, so I'm not going to try to imitate that. And also, English, certainly since the time of Shakespeare, has been more oriented towards a 5-beat line. A pentameter is more normal. I think that has a lot to do with the fact that we have so many more plosive consonant clusters in English that we don't have open vowel endings. It takes a lot more breath to complete a thought in English than it does in languages that have more open vowel endings. So hexameter, for example, is more common in French, Alexandrian, and so on. But let's not worry about hexameter versus pentameter, shall we? Okay. And again, imitates, he's talking about his principle of imitation. In this case, imitation of dramatic action, right? Drama. And he's setting aside comedy, and there's speculation as to whether or not he wrote more on the subject of comedy, but we don't need to talk. I talked about comedy in relation to the opening of Cavalier and Clay, so you can go back to the podcast where I talked about that, although that was really tragic comedy, not comic at all. And but in terms of basic distinctions, who knows? Maybe someday somebody will find a lost manuscript of Aristotle's analysis of comedy, which in his time was shifting from old comedy, the Satyr-Go plays, to the new comedy, Menander, romantic comedy, and so on, right? Which we said, which is really the ancestor of the Shakespearean comedies, right? Twelfth Night. Although the perhaps I guess you could argue that the gender reversals, which are integral to Shakespearean comedy, are more characteristic of the Greek Old Comedy, which was very, very phallic and very raunchy and very sexualized. Because that seems to be the element in Shakespeare's comedies which flips everyone out nowadays, no one is able to wrap their heads around the fact that in Shakespeare's London, women were, it was too dangerous because it was a pre-enlightened time, and it was a time of the wars of European religion, and the streets were unpoliced and very dangerous. Women were not allowed to go out by themselves to the theater generally, and were not allowed to act on stage. I mean, unless they were like very, very upper class. And Shakespeare's heroines were performed by younger apprentice actors dressed as women. So the travesty, the cross-dressing aspect, was inherent to Shakespeare's comic sensibility, not to his tragedies. There's no burlesque in Anthony Cleopatra or Romeo and Juliet or any Lady Macbeth. Those are not those are serious female characters. But in the Twelfth Night, As You Like It, etc., there's always an element of burlesque. Certainly the Rosalind's epilogue in As You Like It, when the performer playing Rosalind, takes off the female costume, takes off the wig and the dress, and presents as the man, the male performer underneath. That was just considered hilarious in Shakespeare's time, but it seems that in contemporary USA that this is viewed as threatening to binary gender norms. So, o tempora o mores, I guess we're back to Victorian fear of Shakespeare. And so who'd have thunk it? Although, of course, what the Victorians were afraid of in Shakespeare was simply his rowdiness and his disunity, not so much the gender play. So each generation has something to fear in Shakespeare. But as I've said, and I've said it again, as powerful and fantastic as Shakespeare is, he doesn't have the power to turn someone gay who is not already gay. So we can just, not worry about that. So let's not worry about Aristotle's observations on comedy, as brilliant that no doubt they may have been. Let's focus on Aristotle's comments on tragedy. And so Aristotle says in Lecture 6, tragedy then is an imitation of an action that is serious, complete, and of a certain magnitude. I've said this again. Serious, complete, and of a certain magnitude, in language embellished with each kind of artistic ornament, the several kinds being found in separate parts of a play, in the form of action, not of narrative, through pity and fear affecting the proper purgation of these emotions. Okay, let me repeat that. Action, not narrative. Okay, so as is said in the theater, show, don't say, right? Through pity and fear affecting the proper purgation of these emotions. Pity and fear, of course, he's saying, of course, the Greek term is catharsis, which is also integral to Freud's understanding of Freud's intertextual understanding of Sophocles, of Oedipus, via Aristotle. So we're at this point we'll be considering Sophocles' Oedipus Tyrannos, Oedipus the King, as sort of as the underlying intertext here. So this is the key dispute between Aristotle and Plato. Aristotle says that the pity and fear, the emotions of pity and fear, are the proper purgation of the emotions of a tragic narrative, and that this is catharsis, and this is a positive, this is a purgation, this is a getting rid of negativity by experiencing it secondarily, right? And or by symbolically re-experiencing it through the tragedy. and and that a great tragedy should move you to deep emotions of pity and fear, to weeping and crying, and to be overcome by emotion in that way. Plato disagrees. Plato, by writing his dialogues, makes it very clear that drama should not have a purgation of pity and fear. It should be a rational conversation between two equal people with different perspectives to consider subjects of importance. And so Plato's theater is a theater of ideas, and I do believe that Plato's dialogues are a form of theater. I believe they are a form of abstract theater, philosophical theater. And as opposed to, I mean, I guess you can say that modern descendants of the Platonic dialogues could include all of the so-called plays without action, all of the theater of the absurd, Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, which is currently being revived on Broadway. I won't comment on that until I see it, except that Beckett is pretty much one of my top 5 favorite 20th century authors, and I consider him to be the novelist, the greatest post-war novelist, hands down. But I consider his playwriting to be also on an extremely exalted level, perhaps not on the highest level of his novels, but still phenomenal and tremendously world-changing. Conceptual theater, so those are all descendants of the Platonic dialogues, where, quote, nothing happens, but where everything is discussed. But Aristotle is a proponent of stage action, where everything appears in action and where there is intense emotion, and pity, and specifically the emotions of pity and fear. Aristotle, his claim is that these are productive when they form a form of purgation, and that can allow us to examine our subconscious drives, and by drawing attention to that we can begin a process of healing. This is the key insight which Freud laid claim to in the sort of psychoanalysis. I mean, at the root of sort of the Freudian vision is the idea of Apollo's oracle at Delphi, in which gnotis eoton, self-knowledge, of, know thyself, in which by speaking to the oracle, or through the intercession of the analyst, one can enter into the dark space of one's subconscious drives and repressed trauma, and one can examine that, and by examining that, one can then, and by re-experiencing it through purgation, one can then overcome the inhibitions of neuroses, and and one can move on to a more productive too. That psychological health is the foundation of physical health. That's the idea of the Apollo's Delphic oracle, and that is the idea of psychoanalysis. That's why psychiatry, in Freud's vision, is a branch of medicine as opposed to purely psychology. Okay, so that's the connection. I really think, yes, that Freud is an Aristotelian, and he's following that, Aristotle's perspective. This disagreement between Aristotle and Plato was so intense, they could not agree to disagree. Plato felt that there was no acceptable place for the emotions of pity and fear and theater, and viewed Aristotle's espousal of catharsis to be fundamentally flawed. I think this argument is still unresolved 2,500 years later. I think people are still arguing whether or not the representation of tragic actions, that is to say, of the horrific actions depicted in tragedies, murder, rape, incest, warfare, so on and so forth, whether these have a legitimate positive role, or whether they are simply disgusting representations of horrible behavior. And whether that could be a net good or a net negative effect on society, I think, you know, we have different opinions. Everyone has a different opinion every day of the week. But Aristotle is completely pro catharsis, and this now what he means by the proper purgation of emotions. Back to lecture 6 of the Poetics. By language embellished, I mean language into which rhythm, harmony, and song enter. And of course, by rhythm, Aristotle means straightforward, rhythmic durations and so on, long and short syllables, stressed syllables, and so on. By harmony, he means here a rational proportion and a harmonious mixture of imagery, sounds, and all of that, and song enter. So language embellished has to be language which is appropriate for song. And I cannot stress this enough. Aristotle's vision of theater is musical theater. Yes, Aristotle would never accept a purely spoken drama like Plato's dialogues or conceptual, so-called straight theater. Aristotle's theater is fundamentally musical, in which there is always a rhythmic element supporting dance, and there is always a melodic element supporting song. And the embellished language, Aristotle's embellished language, his ideal lexis, diction, is language which it would be viewed as either a song text or a libretto. Okay. And there's some degree or another, which would always benefit by some degree of pitch-based tonal declamation, keeping in mind that classical Greek was a tonally declaimed language, and that also made it more appropriate for public speaking. Okay. Back to lecture 6. By the several kinds and separate parts, I mean that some parts are rendered through the medium of verse alone, others again with the aid of song. That there's a continuum from speech to heightened speech to declamation to a kind of a Sprechstimme or a kind of a recitative to a full-blown singing. So just as there is in mature forms of opera, we see the same as opposed to, I guess, the Broadway musical where there's just speaking and singing and there's very little, although let's give credit where credit is due. I mean, sophisticated composers of Broadway musicals, Jerome Kern, Rodgers and Hammerstein, Stephen Sondheim, have always worked through a gradation, a subtle shift of gears from speaking to singing. Of course, in the works of Leonard Bernstein and others, Gershwin's Porgy and Bess, which will be coming to the Met this season, so we look forward to that as well. Good composers always create a smooth continuum from speech to singing, just as Aristotle says here. Okay? Back to lecture 6. Now, as tragic imitation implies persons acting, it necessarily follows, in the first place, that spectacular equipment will be part of tragedy. Next, song and diction, for these are the medium of imitation. By diction, I mean the mere metrical arrangement of the words. For as for song, it is a term whose sense everyone understands. Okay, so again, these are this English translation. These terms would be, of course, what he means by the spectacular equipment. The Greek term is opsis, right? The visual composition of the work, and Aristotle is very clear. Spectacular equipment. He means stage sets. He expects a tremendous amount of money to be spent on stage spectacle. And so it is a theater which requires funding and production and an entire community of professionals involved, right? And opsis and then song, the Greek word for song is melos, the melodic aspect, and diction, the Greek word is lexis. All right, and those being the three less important. Okay, but then moving up the chain from spectacle, song, and diction. Okay, now we get to the three elements which are the imitation of an action. So again, tragedy is the imitation of an action, and an action implies personal agents who necessarily possess certain distinctive qualities both of character and thought. For it is by these that we qualify actions themselves, and these, thought and character, are the two natural causes from which actions spring. Okay, thought and character, once again, I don't speak Greek, but we should know that, the Greek terms here for the thought of a tragedy, dianoia, right? Or theme, sometimes translated as theme, and character, ethos, E-T-H-O, ethos, are the two natural causes from which actions spring, and on actions, again, all success or failure depends. Hence, the plot is the imitation of the action. For by plot, I mean arrangement of the incidents. Okay? And so our English term plot, the Greek term is the mythos, mythos, M-Y-T-H-O-S, right, in English. And by character, or ethos, I mean that in virtue of which we ascribe certain qualities to the agents. Thought, or dianoia, is required whenever a statement is proved, or it may be a general truth enunciated. Every tragedy, therefore, must have 6 parts, which parts determine its quality, namely, a plot, mythos, character, ethos, diction, lexis, thought, dianoia, spectacle, opsis, and song, melos. 2 of the parts constitute the medium of imitation, 1 the manner, and 3 the objects of imitation. Okay? 2 of the parts are the medium of imitation, 1 is the manner of imitation, 3 of the objects are the objects of imitation. And these complete the list. These elements have been employed, we may say, by the poets to a man. In fact, every play contains spectacular elements, as well as character, plot, diction, song, and thought. So, again, let's recap. Aristotle makes it very clear that there must be spectacle. That it's not just for Broadway shows, right? It's not just for vulgar Las Vegas type entertainment. There has to be spectacle. There has to be song, and song and dance. Rhythmic and melodic component, as well as there has to be diction. There has to be memorable language, as well as character, plot, and theme. And theme is something to think about, food for thought, which is so often lacking in otherwise enjoyable Hollywood films, right? But most important of all is the structure of the incidents. Okay, so the plot, the mythos. For tragedy is an imitation not of men, but of an action and of life. And life consists in action, and its end is a mode of action, not a quality. Okay, so Aristotle is making a philosophical claim here, that life is action. He's arguing for the vita activa, as opposed to the vita contemplativa. This is another basic, fundamental dividing line between Aristotle and Plato. For Plato, contemplation of the eternal truths, that is what makes life worth living. And for Aristotle, life consists in action. Keep in mind that Aristotle's most famous student was Alexander the Great, whose entire life consisted of action. Right. Now, character determines men's qualities, and it is by their actions that they are happy or the reverse. This is a has been paraphrased many times. Character is destiny. Was that Democritus who said character is destiny? I'll have to look. I'll have to do a check on that, right? But Aristotle's substantially saying the same thing here when he says, now character determines men's qualities, but it is by their actions that they are happy or the reverse. Dramatic action, therefore, is not with a view to the representation of character. Character comes in as subsidiary to the actions. Okay? Very important that the action, the plot, is number one. Character supports it. All right. Most important thing is action, not character. Hence, all the incidents and the plot are the end of a tragedy, and the end is the chief thing of all. Again, without action, there cannot be a tragedy. There may be without character. The tragedies of most of our modern poets fail in the rendering of character, and of poets in the general, this is often true. Okay. So now we have some specific guidelines for evaluating drama, that even if the action, there is good action in a story, there have to be important representation of the character. If the character is not fully developed, if the character is not fully human and fully three-dimensional and believable, then the action is just stuff being thrown in your face. And we see this all the time in action movies, right? Where there's action, but really no character, where the characters are not interesting or believable or really fully fleshed out three-dimensional human beings in any real way, which is meaningful to adults, perhaps meaningful to children. All right? And back to the lecture. Of poets in general, this is often true. It is the same in painting, and here lies the difference between Zeuxis and Polygnotus. Polygnotus delineates character well. The style of Zeuxis is devoid of ethical quality. Again, if you string together a set of speeches expressive of character and well finished in point of diction and thought, you will not produce the essential tragic effect nearly so well as a play which, however deficient in these respects, yet has a plot and artistically constructed incidents. Okay, so just talking heads on stage. That's Aristotle hits the nail on the head. That's just like a boring series of speeches. Perhaps like this podcast. I hope not. I'm trying to keep it interesting. Besides which, the most powerful elements are of emotional interest of tragedy: the peripeteia, the reversal of the situation, and the recognition scenes. The peripeteia is the reversal of the situation, the recognition. The term for the peripeteia is the Greek word for the reversal, and for recognition, the Greek term is ananorisis. So peripeteia, ananorisis, the reversal and the recognition are parts of the plot. The further proof is that novices in the art attain to finish of diction and precision of portraiture before they can construct the plot. It is the same with almost all the early poets. So again, this is a criteria of success or failure. If an immature writer is focusing too much on fancy diction and precise portraiture, but they can't construct a plot, it still fails. The plot, then, is the first principle, and as it were, the soul of tragedy. Character holds the second place. Similar fact is seen in painting. The most beautiful colors, laid on confusedly, will not give as much pleasure as the chalk outline of a portrait. Thus, tragedy is the imitation of action and the agents mainly of the view to action. Even though Aristotle simply says this as a comparative metaphor, I think he's making a very, very deep, insightful point about the art of painting. Just color fields, just colors, without outlines. I mean, they're meaningful. They express emotion, right? But what really moves us in a painting is the line. The line, that is really where we have, where there's mastery of line. When from drawing to painting, that is what really captures the expressive soul of a painting. And as much as I worship the greatness of the abstract expressionists, of the Mark Rothko and the color field painters, I do feel that with the diminution of line, there is a diminution of expressive force. And I think Rothko, the great genius of the color, I think came up against a wall there, you know, and I think it drove him mad. I'm sorry. I think that contributed to his personal tragedy, and I think that necessity of the expressive force of the line made many brought many of the great abstract expressionists back to figurative painting. I'm speaking specifically here of the great Philip Guston, right? You know, who shocked everyone by returning to figurative line-based, painting after having achieved fantastic mastery in just color fields. You know, okay. So let's get back to lecture 6. I do think that Aristotle gives us productive insights into all of the arts, not just to literature, not just to drama, not just to poetry, and not just to fiction. Okay. Third in order is thought. And again, dianoia. So plot, number 1, mythos. Number 2, character, ethos. Number 3, thought, dianoia. Third in order is thought. That is the faculty of saying what is possible and pertinent in given circumstances. In the case of oratory, this is the function of political art and the art of rhetoric. And so indeed the older poets make their characters speak the language of civic life. Okay, so of course this is extremely important in politics, the use of rhetorical figural language in making a case. And this is what separates great political success from those. You know, you can have someone who has a mastery of oratory, of the arts of public speaking, of rhetoric, of vocal projection, and so on. These are the ones who rise to the top of civic life, you know, when it is combined with a meaningful content. Aristotle says the poets of our time, the language of the rhetoricians, make the poets of our time use the language of the rhetoricians. By his time, the techniques of public speaking had been codified into the techniques of rhetoric, which we should all study rhetoric, because the rhetoricians really got it down. Yeah, we should all have a basic grasp of the basic, because from rhetoric goes directly into public speaking, but of course also into the subtleties of the different types of metaphorical language and symbolic language of poetry. Character is that which reveals the moral purpose, showing what kind of things a man chooses or avoids. Character, ethos. Speeches, therefore, which do not make this manifest, or in which the speaker does not choose or avoid anything whatever, are not expressive of character. Thought, on the other hand, dianoia, is found wherever something is proved to be or not to be, or a general maxim is enunciated. Okay. Fourth among the elements is enumerated comes diction, and the Greek is lexis, by which I mean, as has already been said, the expression of the meaning in words, and its essence is the same both in verse and prose. In modern terms, what Aristotle means by diction or lexis is memorable language, catchphrases which exist above and beyond the work itself. So even if you've never seen Hamlet, you've heard the phrase "to be or not to be," right? That's an example of successful diction, because it's so memorable. The rhythm, it's just the contrast, the use of antithesis, the parallel construction of the infinitives, and so on, right? And the meaning is so meaningful and so pregnant with meaning, right? And in movies, of course, like Star Wars, Luke, you are my son, or May the Force be with you, or gangster movies like The Godfather, it's an offer you can't refuse. These are phrases which exist above and beyond the work itself. Those are examples of diction, of lexis. back to lecture 6, of the remaining elements, song holds the chief place among the embellishments. So again, Aristotle is very definitive that music, we need songs. You need singing. And the dramatic form, which is closest to Aristotle's ideal, would be a serious tragic opera. Yes, but I think Aristotle would insist upon a kind of opera where the words are more intelligible than, the problem from the Aristotelian perspective is that when you go to the opera song, the singing is dominates over the language, over the diction, and Aristotle says diction comes first. So that maybe perhaps a type of singing closer to Broadway singing, which keeps the words more comprehensible, and the type of singing which fills overly big modern opera houses, with more than 1,000 seats, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 seats, ridiculously overly large opera houses. This makes it almost impossible to hear clear enunciation, particularly of the English language, which, as I said, has these difficult consonant clusters and plosives, which make articulation difficult, much more difficult than in the Romance languages, for sure. Yeah, and Aristotle continues: the spectacle has indeed an emotional attraction of its own, but of all the parts, it is the least artistic and connected least with the art of poetry. For the power of tragedy, we may be sure, is felt even apart from representation and actors. Besides, the production of spectacular effects depends more on the art of the stage machinist than that of the poet. Okay, so he's simply acknowledging the fact that it is theater is a complex community-wide endeavor that requires the cooperation of a whole team of artist professionals. And there's the stage machinist is the one creating the stage spectacle. And stage spectacle was very important in Greek times. They wanted, for example, they had cranes over the stage to create realistic effects of gods levitating over the action and things like that, which required quite a bit of engineering and which required a lot of technical ingenuity. This was not, again, at all like the Platonic dialogues of people calmly sitting and discussing philosophical topics. This was the representation of actions of humans and the actions of deities in mythological stories. And but human action being most important by far. Let's move on to lecture 7. Of Aristotle's Poetics. These principles being established, let us now discuss the proper structure of the plot, since this is the first and foremost thing in tragedy. Now, according to our definition, tragedy is an imitation of an action that is complete and whole and of a certain magnitude. Those are its 3 criteria: complete, whole, and of a certain magnitude. For there may be a whole that is wanting in magnitude, a whole which itself is that which has a beginning, a middle, and an end, a beginning that does not itself follow anything by causal necessity, but after which something naturally is or comes to be. An end, on the contrary, is that which naturally follows some other thing, either by necessity or as a rule, but has nothing following it. A middle is that which follows something as some other thing follows it. A well-constructed plot, therefore, must neither begin nor end at haphazard, but conform to these principles. Okay? So these are Aristotle's basic criteria for a well-constructed plot. And ask ourselves, how often do we not have a clear beginning, middle, and end? Yeah. Okay. Again, a beautiful object, whether it is a living organism or any whole composed of parts, must not only have an orderly arrangement of parts, but must be of a certain magnitude. For beauty depends on magnitude and order. Hence, a very small animal organism cannot be beautiful, for the view of it is confused. He's speaking of like amoeba, paramecia, stuff like that. The object being seen is almost imperceptible, and is in an almost imperceptible moment of time. Nor again can one of vast size be beautiful, for the eye cannot take it in all at once. The unity and sense of the whole is lost for the spectator. As for an instance, there was one, as if there were 1,000 miles long. As therefore in the case of animate bodies and organisms, a certain magnitude is necessary, and a magnitude which may be easily embraced in one view. So in the plot, a certain length is necessary, and a length which can be easily embraced by the memory. The limit of length in relation to dramatic competition and sensuous presentiment is in no part of artistic theory, for it has been the rule for hundreds of tragedies that to compete together the performance would have been regulated by the water clock, as indeed we are told was formerly done. But the limit as fixed by the nature of the drama itself is this: the greater the length, the more beautiful the piece will be by reason of its size, provided the whole is perspicuous. And to define the matter roughly, we may say that the proper magnitude is comprised within such limits, that the sequence of events, according to the law of probability or necessity, will admit a change from bad fortune to good, or from good fortune to bad. I think this is the truth of this is borne out in our own experiences. A very short play, a tiny scene is not a satisfactory whole, and a short play which doesn't really have any valuable meaning for our lives, it feels like a waste of time. But the bigger the works, the greater the satisfaction if they are meaningfully filled. An experience of a great Wagner opera such as Götterdämmerung or Parsifal or Tristan or even, well, all right, let's leave it at those, which can take up 5 to 6 hours of an evening, can be overwhelmingly positive. I have maybe yet to have had that same experience with Die Meistersinger, which is equally long. I'm saying there may be things which be equally long but less valuable. That's a charge often brought against other grand operas. I personally like Meyerbeer, but I understand the objections made against the grand operas of Meyerbeer. I admire the ambition of grand operas to fill a large space of time, 4, 5, or 6 hours, with truly meaningful and valuable stage experience. I have never seen a complete performance of the complete full text of Hamlet, which would probably take about 5 hours on stage. It would be wonderful. Wouldn't that be wonderful to see a complete Hamlet and not just read it? Yeah. But it's never done because it takes up too much time. Modern audiences certainly do not have the stamina for anything more than, say, 2 hours. And that's just the way it is. I mean, we've been conditioned, by TV and movies to a kind of a 90-minute length, as sort of as the default. And it seems to be very hard to go beyond that. It in terms of closet dramas, I've never seen a complete Peer Gynt or, Faust or whatever like that. I hope one of these days I would be able to. But I personally love digging into a big, beautiful drama and spending a whole day with it. To me, that's a wonderful, wonderful experience. And I think this is part of what Aristotle is saying. The bigger the beauty, the bigger the time it needs to express to have and the more satisfactory. Lecture 8. Unity of plot does not, as some persons think, consist in the unity of the hero, for infinitely various are the incidents in one man's life which cannot be reduced to unity, and so too are the many actions of one man cannot be made out of action. Hence the error, as it appears, of all poets who have composed a Heracleid, a Theseid, or other poems of this kind. They imagine that as Heracles was one man, the story of Heracles must also be a unity. But Homer, as in all else, he is of surpassing merit here too, whether from art or by natural genius, seems to have happily discerned the truth. In composing the Odyssey, he did not include all of the adventures of Odysseus, such as the wound of Parnassus or his feigned madness at the mustering of the host, incidents of which there was no necessary or probable connection. But he made the Odyssey and likewise the Iliad to center round an action that in our sense of the word is one. As therefore, as in the other imitative arts, the imitation is one in which the object imitated is one. So that the plot, being an imitation of an action, must imitate one action, and that a whole, the structural union of the parts being such that if any one of them is displaced or removed, the whole will be disjointed and disturbed. For anything whose presence or absence makes no visible difference is not an organic part of the whole. Okay, let's repeat that, because here Aristotle is articulating a Platonic idea of organicism, of unity. All right? A whole, the structural union of the parts being such that if any one of them is displaced or removed, the whole will be disjointed and disturbed. For a thing whose presence or absence makes no visible difference is not an organic part of the whole. And this aesthetic philosophy of unity, which I believe is ultimately Pythagorean, the idea of the one, but being filtered through Plato's sort of Neo-Pythagoreanism. First of all, I agree. And secondly, it is the essence of my musical aesthetics. And I think this is true of all arts, not just literature, not just fiction, drama, but it is true of painting, it is true of visual art, it is true of music, it is true of sonic art, it is true of all arts, is that organic unity is what makes artwork great. And the greater the integration of a diversity of elements, the greater the artwork. This is how we can analyze and evaluate and come to understand on our own without being told. We can. These are the criteria by which, as adults, we can analyze, interpret, and evaluate works of art, and as a subset of that, how we can analyze, evaluate, and interpret drama. Let's continue. Let's continue into lecture 9. I'm not sure if we'll get through the entire colloquium today, but let's go. Right. Lecture 9. It is, moreover, evident from what has been said that it is not the function of the poet to relate what has happened or what may happen, what is possible according to the law of probability or necessity. The poet and the historian differ, not by writing in verse or prose. The work of Herodotus might be put into verse, but it would still be a species of history with no meter, no less than without it. The true difference, of course, Herodotus, the great chronicler, right? The true difference is that one relates what has happened, the other what may happen. Poetry, therefore, is a more philosophical and higher thing than history, for poetry tends to express the universal, history the particular. All right, let's say that again. The true difference is that one relates what has happened, the other may be what happened. Poetry, therefore, is a more philosophical and a higher thing than history, for poetry tends to express the universal, history the particular. So Aristotle is saying that fiction, literature and fiction, is greater than nonfiction. Nonfiction narrates the particular. Fiction, poetry, drama narrate what is universal to all humanity in all times. So, people tend to have very strong opinions about fiction versus nonfiction. Aristotle is saying fiction is greater than nonfiction. So it's an opportunity for us to examine our own biases there. There's a certain, internalized sexism, or a kind of like an internalized machismo. 10 men are kind of socially conditioned to prefer nonfiction over fiction. Fiction tends to be essentialized as feminine, and is often, with internalized sexism, is often denigrated. And Aristotle is stating the exact opposite, that actually in literature, in poetry, fiction, and drama, there are universal truths more valuable than specific case histories. Back to the text. By the universal, I mean how a person of a certain type will on occasion speak or act according to the law of probability or necessity. And it is this universality at which poetry aims in the names she attaches to the personages. The particular is, for example, what Alcibiades did or suffered. Alcibiades, the famous disciple of Socrates, who was very active in Athenian politics, famously beautiful. In comedy, this is already apparent. For here, the poet first constructs the plot on the lines of probability and then inserts characteristic names, unlike the lampooners who write about particular individuals. But tragedians still keep to real names. Lampooners, satirists, right? Who were making. Aristophanes often calls out people by name, like Socrates and so on. So he's being the lampoon, right? But tragedians still keep to real names, the reason being that what is possible is credible. What has not happened, we do not at once feel sure to be possible. What has happened is manifestly possible. Otherwise it would not have happened. By tragedy, he's talking about tragedies based in historical episodes, like of war stories of specific people, or mythological stories based upon people who were presumed to have historically lived. Like such as Oedipus, who was assumed to have been an actual king of ancient Thebes. Still, there are even some tragedies in which there are only one or two well-known names, the rest being fictitious. In others, none are well-known, as in Agathon's Antheus, where incidents and names alike are fictitious, and yet give none the less pleasure. We must not therefore at all costs keep to the received legends, which are the usual subjects of tragedy. Indeed, it would be absurd to attempt it, for even subjects that are known to only a few yet give pleasure to all. It clearly follows that the poet or maker should be the maker of plots rather than of verses. Since he is a poet because he imitates, and what he imitates are actions. And even if he chances to take an historical subject, he is nonetheless a poet. So he's saying that historically based drama is fine because of the universality which the poet is bringing into it. So Shakespeare, built his tragedies around nuggets of historical truth as he understood it to be, but transformed them with his genius to be universal pictures of what is true for all humanity. And that's also true, of course, of the classical poets as well. And since the story is more or less about these events have actually happened to not conform. And if there's no reason why some events that have actually happened that should not conform to the law of the probable and possible, and in virtue of that quality, he is their poet or maker. And again, the criteria here: what is probable, what is possible. Of all plots and actions, the episodic, the episodic are the worst. I call a plot episodic, or English episodic, in which the episodes or acts succeed one another without probable or necessary sequence. Bad poets compose such pieces of their own fault. Good poets to please the players, for as they write, they show pieces for competition. They stretch the plot beyond its capacity and are often forced to break the natural continuity. But again, tragedy is an imitation not only of a complete action, but of events inspiring fear or pity. Such an effect is best produced when the events come on us by sunrise. The effect is heightened when at the same time they follow as cause and effect. Tragic wonder will then be greater as if they happened by themselves or by accident. For even coincidences are most striking when they have an air of design. We may instance the statue of Mittis at Argos, which fell upon his murderer while he was a spectator at a festival and killed him. Such events seem not due to mere chance. Plots, therefore, constructed on these principles are necessarily the best. Okay? So we've said it again, we're just reiterating, that episodic construction, whether it is in drama or in music, is always weak. Discursive, episodic, audiences can love and applaud episodic music, pieces like Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto, where there's just tune, 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 virtuoso display, spectacle, big thundering climax, but that's unmusical. And that's really an inferior level of music. And we really need to say that this is a lower level of music, even if audiences love it. We need to be able to analyze, and we need to call out disunity and when things are episodic for what they are. And we can't just simply say, well, it's all good because people put their hands together and they clap for it. Of course, some applause is better than no applause. All right. Lecture 10, Plots are either simple or complex. For the actions of real life, which are the plots of imitation, obviously show a similar distinction. An action which is one and continuous in the sense above defined, I call simple, when the change of fortune takes place without reversal of the situation and without recognition. A complex action is one in which the change is accompanied by such reversal, and again, the Greek word for reversal, peripeteia, or by recognition, anonorisis, or by both. These last should arise from the internal structure of the plot, so that what follows should be necessary or probable, the necessary or probable result of the preceding action. It makes all the difference whether any given event is a case of propter hoc or post hoc, before the case or after the case. And we'll look at some examples of simple plots versus complex plots. And often simple plots are very popular, but Aristotle is making a qualitative claim. He's saying that complex plots are the best. And let's see if we agree or disagree with him. Let's move on to lecture 11. Reversal of the situation. Peripeteia is a change by which the action veers round to its opposite, subject always to the rules of probability or necessity. Thus, in the Oedipus, and he's speaking here of Oedipus the king, Oedipus Tyrannos of Sophocles, the messenger comes to cheer Oedipus and free him from the alarms about his mother. But by revealing who he is, he produces the opposite effect. Again, in the Lynceus, Lynceus is led away to his death, and Danaus goes with him, meaning to slay him. But the outcome of the preceding incidents is that Danaus is killed and Lynceus is saved. Recognition, anonorisis, as the name indicates, is a change from ignorance to knowledge, producing love or hate between the persons destined by the poet for a good or bad fortune. The best form of recognition is coincident with the reversal of the situation, as in the Oedipus. There are indeed other forms. Even inanimate things of the most trivial kind may in a sense be objects of recognition. Again, we may recognize or discover whether a person has done a thing or not. But the recognition, which is the most intimately connected with the plot and the action, is, as we have said, the recognition of persons. This recognition combined with reversal, recognition, anonorisis, combined with reversal, peripeteia, will produce either pity or fear. And actions producing these effects are those which, by our definition, tragedy represents. Because if pity and fear are intense enough, there will be the purgation of negative emotions, catharsis. Moreover, it is upon such situations that the issues of good or bad fortune will depend. Recognition, then, being between persons, it may happen that one person is only as recognized by the other when the latter is already known. It may be necessary that the recognition should be on both sides. Thus, Iphigenia is revealed to Orestes by the sending of the letter, but another act of recognition is required to make Orestes known to Iphigenia. That's all right. Two parts then of the plot. I mean, Orestes, Iphigenia. I mean, you know the story of Agamemnon, Electra, Clytemnestra, and all of that. So maybe we'll discuss that some other time if we have a chance to analyze the stories of Orestes and Electra. Getting back to lecture 11, two parts then of plot: reversal, situation of the situation and recognition. Peripeteia and anonorisis turn upon surprises. A third part of the scene is suffering. The scene of suffering is a destructive or painful action, such as the death on stage, bodily agony, wounds, and the like. The scene of suffering is the catastrophe, the destructive or painful action. Part 12. The parts of tragedy which must be treated as elements of the whole have already been mentioned. We now come to the quantitative parts and the separate parts of it, into which a tragedy is divided, namely prologue, episode, exode, choric song, the last being divided into parod, parodos, and stasimon. These are common to all plays. Peculiar to some are the songs of actors from the stage and the komoi. The prologue is that the entire part of the tragedy which precedes the paroda of the chorus, the part of the tragedy before the entrance, the first entrance, the parodos, the first entrance of the chorus, right? The episode is the entire part of the tragedy which is between the complete choric songs. The exodos is the entire part of the tragedy which has no choric song after it, the final one. Of the choric part of the parodos, the paroda, is the first undivided utterance of the chorus. The stasimon is a choricone without anapest or trochaic tetrameters. The komos is the joint lamentation of chorus and actors. The parts of tragedy, which must be treated as elements of the whole, have already been mentioned. The quantitative parts of the separate parts into which it is divided are here enumerated. Of course, this is specific to the conventions of classical Greek tragedy of the classical era, but we should observe these whenever we're reading Aeschylus, Sophocles, or Euripides, and so we should, be familiar with the lingo there. All right, Parados, Exodus, Stasimon, and the odes. Right. Lecture 13. As the sequel to what has already been said, we must proceed to consider what the poet should aim at, what he should avoid in constructing his plots, and by what means the specific effect of tragedy will be produced. A perfect tragedy should, as we have seen, be arranged not only on the simple but the complex plan. Okay, now here Aristotle's really laying down his criteria, which you should consider, which I accept, but you may either accept or reject, is that not a simple but a complex plan of reversal and recognition of peripeteia and aneurisys together forming the climax, which incites the suffering and the catharsis. It should, moreover, imitate actions which excite pity and fear, this being the distinctive mark of tragic imitation. It follows plainly, we don't experience pity and fear in comedies, just sort of embarrassment, or Schadenfreude perhaps. It follows plainly, in the first place, that the change of fortune presented must not be the spectacle of a virtuous man brought from prosperity to adversity, for this moves neither pity nor fear, it merely shocks us. Nor again that of a bad man passing from adversity to prosperity, because nothing could be more alien to the spirit of tragedy. It possesses no single tragic quality, and it neither satisfies the moral sense nor calls forth pity or fear. Unfortunately, that's just the reality that we see in politics everywhere. And that's really you can say that is what motivated Dante's Inferno, the spectacle of a bad man passing from adversity to prosperity, because all of the figures in Dante's Inferno were bad men who ended their lives in glory and could only be punished in the afterlife, right? Nor again should the downfall of the utter villain be exhibited. Yes, okay, so we know that's that whole Hollywood thing of getting the bad guy or killing the bad guy, does not belong in tragedy. Yeah. A plot of this kind would doubtless satisfy the moral sense, but it would inspire neither pity nor fear. Yeah, what's the point of showing killing or punishing the bad guy? But Hollywood loves that, right? For pity is aroused by unmerited misfortune, fear by the misfortune of a man like ourselves. Such an event, therefore, will be neither pitiful nor terrible. There remains then the character between these two extremes, that of a man who is not eminently good and just, yet whose misfortune is brought about not by vice or depravity, or by some error or frailty. He must be one who is highly renowned and prosperous, a person like Oedipus, Thyestes, or some illustrious men of such families. A well-constructed plot should therefore be single in its issue, rather than double, as some maintain. A change of fortune should be not from bad to good, but reversely from good to bad. It should come about a result not of vice, but of some great error or frailty. Great error or frailty, the Greek terms here for great error are hamartia and frailty, hubris. Hamartia and hubris. And a character was either such we have described, rather or better rather than worse. The practice of the stage bears out our view. At first the poets recounted any legend that came their way. Now the best tragedies are founded on the story of a few houses, on the fortunes of Alcmaeon, Oedipus, Orestes, Meleager, Thyestes, Telephus, and those who have done or suffered something terrible. Tragedy, then, to be perfect, according to the rules of art, should be of this construction. Hence, they are in error they are in error who censure Euripides, when just because he follows this principle in his plays, many of which end unhappily. It is, as we have said, the right ending. The best proof is that on stage and in dramatic competition, such plays, if well worked out, are the most tragic in effect. And Euripides, faulty though he may be in the general management of his subject, yet is felt to be the most tragic of the poets. So we'll come back to Euripides, definitely in terms of his dramas in future episodes. Yeah, although I think we're focusing on Sophocles right now. Keep in mind that Oedipus's Sophocles was a failure in its first production in 432 BC. The audience hated the tragic ending. They were whistling. They were throwing rotten vegetables on the stage. They hated it. So to this day, Aristotle is saying this is correct, but the audiences don't like it. Audiences want those happy endings. In the second rank comes a kind of tragedy which some place first. Like the Odyssey, there's a double thread of plot, and also an opposite catastrophe for good and the bad. It is accounted the best because of the weakness of the spectators, where the poet is guided by what he writes for the wishes of the audience. The pleasure, how therefore, is derived as the not the true tragic pleasure. It is proper rather than to comedy, where there are those who in the piece are the deadliest enemies, like Orestes and Aegisthus, quit the stage as friends at the close, and where no one is slays or is slain. So he's saying this is what audiences like. Audiences like the happy ending. Audiences like the Hollywood ending. But Aristotle is saying this is bullshit. This is not great art. And if you believe purely that the market decides, well, all right, then you're going to be splitting from Aristotle here. And I think there's time to at least look at section 14. So let's look at lecture 14 of Aristotle's Poetics. Fear and pity, catharsis, may be aroused by spectacular means, but they also may result from the inner structure of the piece, which is the better way and indicates a superior poet. For the plot ought to be so constructed, even without the aid of the eye, he who hears the tale told will thrill with horror and melt the pity at what takes place. So I think this is a major difference between the horror genre and the tragic genre, is that fear and pity in horror is based upon spectacle, seeing blood and guts on stage. You can experience those emotions in tragedy through the power of character and words, yes, and through just the way the plot takes place. We can move us, just through. All right, this is the impression we should receive from hearing the story of the Oedipus. Aristotle says, but to produce this effect, the mere spectacle is of a less artistic method and dependent upon extraneous aids. Those who employ spectacular means to create a sense not of the terrible, but only of the monstrous, are strangers to the purpose of tragedy. For we must not demand of tragedy any and every kind of pleasure, but only that which is proper to it. Since the pleasure which the poet should afford comes from pity and fear through imitation, it is evident that this quality must be impressed upon the incidents. In about 2 weeks, there'll be the New York opening of the London West End production of the new production of Oedipus, and I can't wait to see it. It's won the Olivier Award, and as soon as I see it, I'll report on that. As soon as I see the Beckett's Waiting for Godot, I'll report on that. But right now, those are waiting in the wings, as is, I guess, Electra and Porgy and Bess and other great dramas. Not to mention Tristan and Isolde, the greatest, which will be in the springtime. Okay, let us determine, back to Aristotle, let us determine what are the circumstances which strike us as terrible or pitiful. In Oedipus, when he rips out his eyes and all of that, it has to be part of the plot. It just can't be like a horror movie element. Yeah. So how the director presents that, it can be explicit or it could be implicit, but it has to be organically connected to the entire production. So we'll see how that goes. what is terrible or pitiful? Actions capable of this effect must happen between persons who are either friends or enemies or indifferent to one another. If an enemy kills an enemy, there is nothing to excite pity or, and again, the act of intention, except so far as the suffering in itself is pitiful. So again with indifferent persons. But when the tragic incident occurs between those who are near and dear to one another, if, for example, a brother kills or intends to kill a brother, a son his father, a mother her son, a son his mother, any other deed of this kind is done, these are situations to be looked for by the poet. He may not indeed destroy the framework of the received legends. The fact that, for example, Clytemnestra was slain by Orestes and Eriphyle by Alcmene, that he ought to show invention of his own and skillfully handle the traditional material. Let us explain more clearly what is meant by skillful handling. Now, again, by Aristotle saying that these like interfamily murders and things like that are the important plot. This particularly was vehemently opposed by Plato. Plato said, no, this is, you're really glorifying violence and pornography of the worst kind. So this has really led to their decisive break between the Academy and why Aristotle had to set off on his own and establish the Lyceum, right? All right, interesting point in the next section here. Aristotle says, the action may be done consciously and with knowledge of the persons in the manner of the older poets. It is thus, too, that Euripides makes Medea slay her children. Or again, the deed of horror may be done, but done in ignorance, and the tie of kinship or friendship is discovered afterwards. The Oedipus of Sophocles is an example. Here, indeed, the incident is outside the drama proper. But cases occur where it falls within the action of the play. One may cite the Alcmaeon of Astyanamus, Telegonus of the wounded Odysseus. Again, there's a third case that is about that to be about to act with knowledge of the persons and then not to act. The fourth case is when someone is about to do an irreparable deed through ignorance and makes the discovery before it is done. These are the only possible ways. For the deed must either be done or not done, and that wittingly or unwittingly. But of all these ways, it is about to act, to be about to act, knowing the persons, and then not to act, is the worst. It is shocking without being tragic, for no disaster follows. It is therefore never or very rarely to be found in poetry. For instance, however, it is in the Antigone, where Haemon threatens to kill Creon. And the next and better way is that the deed should be perpetrated. Still better, that it should be perpetrated in ignorance, and that the discovery be made afterwards. There is then nothing to shock us, while the discovery produces a startling effect. The last case is best, as when Cresphontes Merope is about to slay her son, but recognizing who he is, spares his life. So in the Iphigenia, the sister recognizes the brother just in time. Again, in the Helle, the son recognizes the mother while on the point of giving her up. This then is why a few families only, as has been already observed, furnish the subjects of tragedy. It was not art, but happy chance that led the poets in search of subjects to impress the tragic quality upon their plots. They are compelled, therefore, to have recourse to those houses whose history contains moving incidents like these. Enough has now been said concerning the structure of the incidents and the right kind of plot. Let's talk a little bit about character. I think it's interesting in section 14 that Aristotle mentions that the important actions, for example, the murder of Laius happens before the drama, right? So it always, whenever I read that passage, I think really there should be a prequel, to Oedipus the King. We really should, reconstruct, we should back-construct the entire Theban chronicle, really starting from the marriage of Harmony and Cadmus and the introduction of the Tiresias, over several generations, and give all the backstory. I would love to spend an entire season going through the entire Theban chronicle, up through, of course, Oedipus, and then the sequels, Oedipus and Colonus, and the Seven Against Thebes, and the Antigone, and all of that. That really would be great. tragedy tonight for a whole season. That would be great. All right. Let's get back to Aristotle. Section 15. In respect of character, ethos, there are four things to be aimed at. So characteristics of good character formation and play. First, and most important, it must be good. Now, any speech or action that manifests moral purpose of any kind will be expressive of character. The character will be good if the purpose is good. This rule is relative to each class. Even a woman may be good and also a slave, though the woman be said. All right, again, this is Aristotle's historical, his sexism and his classism. Although the woman may be said to be an inferior being and the slave quite worthless. The second thing is to aim at propriety. Despite our presentist outrage at Aristotle's sexism and classism here, keep in mind that he's emphasizing the excellence that is in all situations, regardless of social status. All right, and that excellence, that inherent excellence, that is arete, as excellence. So, and also keep in mind that arete, excellence, is a gender neutral, is a ungendered term in ancient Greek. Arete refers equally to women, men, and things. A woman's has excellence, a sword has excellence, a man has excellence, arete, as opposed to the Latin virtus, which is masculine. Right. And so the second thing is to aim at propriety. There is a type of manly valor. All right, and manly valor, this is the Latin idea of virtus, but valor in a woman or unscrupulous cleverness is inappropriate. Third, character must be true to life. This is the distinct thing from goodness and propriety as here described. The fourth point is consistency. For though the subject of the imitation who suggested the type be consistent, he must be consistently inconsistent. As an example of motiveless degradation of character, we have Menelaus in Orestes, the character indecorous and inappropriate. The lament of Odysseus in the Scylla and the speech of Melanippe. Of inconsistency, the Iphigenia Aulus, for Iphigenia, the suppliant, in no way resembles her later self. He must be consistently inconsistent. Like, to be true to life, this is who we are as human beings. We are consistently inconsistent. We are always true to ourselves, but we react differently in different situations. This is a very, very important, insightful psychological point here by Aristotle. As in the structure of the plot, so too in the portraiture of character, the poet should always aim at the necessary or the probable. Thus, a person of a given character should speak or act in a given way by the rule either of necessity or probability, just as this event should follow by necessary or probable sequence. It is therefore evident that the unraveling of the plot, no less than the complication, must arise out of the plot itself. It must not be brought about by the deus ex machina, as in the Medea or the Return of the Greeks in the Iliad. The deus ex machina should be employed only for events external to the drama, for antecedent or subsequent events which lie beyond the range of the human knowledge, which require to be reported or foretold. For to the gods we ascribe the power of seeing all things. Within the action there must be nothing irrational. If the irrational cannot be excluded, it should be outside the scope of tragedy. Such is the irrational element in the Oedipus of Sophocles. So in the Oedipus of Sophocles, the appearance of the messenger this is my commentary, first appears as a kind of a deus ex machina, this totally unrelated character comes into the drama and is turning a tragedy into a happy ending. But then it's not a deus ex machina. It turns out to be like a necessary part of the peripeteia, the reversal, and the anagnorisis, the revelation. So that's it's the happy ending. The magic wand is revoked, is sort of proffered and revoked, and that what makes it so powerful and so bitterly ironic and so deeply tragically ironic. Again, since tragedy is an imitation of persons who are above the common level, the example of good portrait painters should be followed. They, while reproducing the distinctive form of the original, make a likeness which is true to life, yet more beautiful. So too the poet, in representing men who are irascible or indolent or have other defects of character, should preserve the type, yet ennoble it. In this way, Achilles is portrayed by Agathon and Homer. Achilles is notoriously wrathful, but still is represented beautifully, right, in Homer. These then are the rules the poet should observe. Nor should he neglect those appeals to the senses, which, though not among the essentials, are concomitants of poetry. For here too there is not much room for error. But of this enough has been said in our published treatises. Maybe I'll draw the line here because this has been a lot of information. Maybe we'll continue with the lecture 16 about the different types of recognition, the different types of anagnorises. So, because there's certainly a lot of that we can chew on in terms of his reflections, Aristotle's reflections on the plays that we know, Medea, the Oedipus, and so on. So let's draw the line here for today. That was sections recap of sections 6 through 15 of Aristotle's Poetics. Okay, so until we meet again, have a great week, and let us experience through the purgation of pity and fear better living through tragedy, and let us bring our sense of criteria to the adjudication to our experience of theater, whether it is on the page or more really live, whether we're watching it on screen, but really what matters is live theater. Go out, see plays, get in the audience, or get on the stage and read it yourself. Theater exists in our bodies, in our communities, in our voices, and in our physical connection to ourselves and to each other. All right, this has been Gregory Muna, aka Master Mu, and this has been Art is the Church of God, the Creator, for Sunday, October 19th, 2025. See you. I think next week we may have an update on Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower. That'll be scheduled for October 25th. So that may interrupt our continuing seminar on Aristotle's Poetics. Okie doke.